Augustine.
Thank you very much. Thank you for welcoming me.
We have also Mr. Abebe from FAO who will join us during this discussion. So as we know, agriculture is something key for the continent because we say it every day, Africa has many challenges. One of the challenges is about food security, how to be sure that all these billions of Africans, which will be more than 2.5 billion in 2050, how will we feed them? How will we allow them to give food? And in the context of COVID, this becomes more urgent and more challenging because we have seen many specific things that have arisen, many specific issues during this COVID crisis that makes this sector more and more essential for the future of Africa. And in this agricultural topic and food security, we know that Africa is really facing climate change, is facing many desertification issues. And so sustainability, resilience are key for the development of agriculture in the continent. That's why it's an important topic today. So just to begin the discussion, I'll first of all turn to Her Excellency Minister Didiza of South Africa to ask you just to tell us how did you face this crisis? We know that food security, being sure that the population were able to have the main processed goods was essential. What was the challenges and what was the answers you have given to face the COVID crisis in the agricultural sector in South Africa?
Thank you very much to you, our chairperson of the session, and also to my panelists, given the time frame, and I've already indicated that I will be requesting that I be excused in an hour due to the parliamentary session that I have to attend. Exactly. But I do have a paper that I will send to the organizers. I must thank you for convening this conference. I'd also like to say that the task of reimagining the food security in Africa post-COVID-19 and actually during COVID-19 is on the agenda for every African member state. While COVID-19 crisis has added new pressures on the African food systems, it is key to recognize that African agriculture was already under pressure when COVID-19 descended upon the continent. South Africa was also one among those countries who was already affected by foot and mouth disease, as well as drought. And we know that in some of our member states, we also had the problem of transboundary pests and diseases such as migratory locust, as well as the fall armyworm. Furthermore, the agricultural trade has been depressed in most member states, and measures to ignite agricultural production and trade have been at the center of the developmental agenda of the member states. Therefore, the advent of COVID-19 has created a perfect storm and is likely to continue to have devastating impact on the lives and health of our fellow Africans. Moreover, it will further disrupt food and nutrition security in the continent and thereby cause instability and potential migration and enhanced scramble for resources. With COVID-19, a number of African economies are facing serious challenges, implying that many people will lose their jobs and income streams, subsequently affecting their livelihoods in the near term, while the world grapples to find a vaccine for this deadly virus. Chairperson, while COVID-19 is a perfect storm, on our economies rather, it also presents us with an opportunity to future-proof African agriculture, to make it more resilient and sustainable, to transform and build resilient agricultural systems. Our developmental strategies must be firmly based on the triple bottom line dimensions of economic, social, and environmental sustainability. Chairperson, you wanted me to reflect what was the South African experience during this time. I must say that what had happened, given that we also were coming out of foot and mouth disease, we were having challenges of drought. When the national disaster was actually declared in March, causing a lockdown, which we called it level 5 at the time, which was really limiting and curtailing a lot of movement of citizens as well as industries in terms of their functionality. What government decided was that agriculture was going to be regarded as an essential service so that there can still be movement of food and that we manage food security, not only in the country, but we can also be able to move the food across our borders to the region, particularly in our SADC region with the countries with whom we actually trade. So that actually assisted that the shocks in agriculture were better managed. But I must say that the challenges of other sectors being closed, like restaurant, leisure and accommodation, did create a challenge for those producers who actually have those as their markets. We also felt it was necessary to intervene by supporting smallholder farmers in particular, who would have experienced a lot of shock during the disruptions of COVID-19. So we put aside 1.2 billion rands to ensure that farmers, smallholder farmers from who have a threshold of about 20,000 to a million annually, they can actually access this grant. And I must say that that has been a welcome intervention by our producers because it has actually removed or rather managed the shocks that they would be experiencing during this time. We did that because we wanted to make sure that we do not lose our agricultural calendar, particularly at this moment. We, at the same time, ensured that we allowed other sectors that during that period were harvesting so that they don't lose their harvest. So harvesting was allowed, it continued, and also, as I said, export of essential agricultural goods was also allowed. That enabled a number of our producers and agribusinesses to actually manage this challenge. But I must say that the COVID-19 also showed some of the fault line within our agricultural system as a country, that even though food was, enough, and we can say we were still food insecure, but the availability of those food to some other regions of our country became a problem, which therefore meant government needed to look at other mechanisms to absorb the shocks for those individuals and communities. We worked with the Social Development Ministry and Department to actually give food parcels to those vulnerable communities so that they can be able to manage food challenges during this period. We also made sure that we keep in touch and have a steering committee with the producers as well as the agribusiness industry so that collectively we can monitor where there were challenges and how we actually upscale that to necessary decision makers so that there could not be any problems. But I must say that South Africa is part of the African continent. One of the issues that we thought it was necessary was to convene a ministerial together with the FAO in April 2020 on the 16th in particular, to look at how we were managing as the African member states around this COVID-19 and look at what interventions do we need to put in place. One of the things that came out very clear was that with hard lockdowns that a number of countries put in place, there were actually disruptions in terms of the movement of goods across particular regions that really created a strain for other communities. The ministers therefore agreed that we needed to ensure that we use our crop calendars, that drastic measures are necessary to minimize disruptions in agricultural tasks and food system during the COVID-19, and really encourage our member states to make sure that we do not lose our agricultural calendar during this period. Secondly, we also agreed that social protection was necessary to ensure that there is effective response and inclusive recovery. The growing direct impact of COVID-19, while is a health pandemic, in terms of morbidity and mortality, as well as quickly overburdening healthcare services with negative repercussions for non-COVID related health system. The increase in social protection program was therefore seen as important and necessary, as well as working with civil society organizations to ensure that where government may not be able to reach with its own systems, actually it can be assisted by our civil society organizations at local level. We also felt it was necessary to support our domestic markets. In our view, governments need to prioritize agri-food systems functions as an essential service that will continue to operate during periods of lockdown or emergency, even curfew. For instance, in our situation in South Africa, what we had to allow during that hard lockdown was to actually ensure that your bee farmers are allowed to work at night during the COVID with necessary exemption so that they do not lose their harvest during that period. There were other measures we put working with the security cluster and the National Joint Operations Team to make sure that we allow for exemptions for the agricultural sector to continue to operate without little or minimal hindrance. We also had to look at the linkage between producers and traders. Initially, when we imposed the lockdown, the food traders in particular were severely affected, and thereby the communities who actually buy from them. So we had to revise the strategy in the middle of that lockdown 5, alert level 5 in particular, to ensure that we can allow for the traders to operate with relevant health protocols even during that period. We agreed as ministers of agriculture then in April that we need to make sure that during this COVID-19 pandemic, we do not lose our commitment to the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, which we had all agreed to. However, we will have to observe how does that happen within the minimal, if I were to call it, within an environment where the health protocols are not compromised. In our own country, we've been engaging with the industry to look at reimagining agriculture now and in the future, given the disruptions that are there, but also given our legacy of the duality in our agricultural sector, so that we can find a common vision. Because clearly, one of the things that COVID-19 has shown is the interconnectedness within the sector and also across the other sectors of economy that we must actually realize do exist. So we are currently working on the agricultural master plan with the industry, which will be launching tomorrow, to actually have a conversation which will enable us to say, how do we go forth in our agricultural sector, given these disruptions that will still going to be with us for some time to come. Agricultural financing is appearing as one of those key issues on how we can support our farmers, particularly to ensure that they can manage to access affordable agricultural credit, but at the same time, their insurance industry to protect themselves. The issue of research and development and technology transfer is another one, particularly on how, as a state, we invest in agricultural research, as well as ensure the accessibility of these to all the farmers from small, medium, and to our commercial sector. Obviously, for us as a country, the issue of land reform, as well as the issue of water accessibility, remains one of those issues of the conversation that we must continue to engage in as a country, as well as issues of managing the risks. As we know that climate change is with us, we've seen particularly in the past year that almost 8 of our provinces across the country actually had drought situation which they are still recovering from, which therefore means for us, climate smart agriculture should not be a matter that it's still discussed, but really it's how do we move on it in the implementation. Issues of Africa continental free trade area, again, it's a commitment that as a country we've made that we would want to ensure that we continue and do not regress from the commitments that we have made. Those are my short, longish interventions, Chairperson, but we will make the paper available to you and the other organizers. I thought just as an opening, this will suffice. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Her Excellency, Minister Diziza. It was very insightful and clear, and the response you have given is very interesting for us. I'll put them in 3 categories. So the social response, to be sure that people have food, that you can help people to go to markets, to do their work of farming, how also you get the economic response on how to secure the sector, how to secure the export, how to secure the transportation to have goods arrive to region, and around that, all the logistical response to this COVID-19 disease, and it's very important. You have pointed out also something very important in your speech, the need we have to link our agriculture to be resilient and sustainable, linking economic, social, and environment, which is key. And that's very important if we need to have food security and if we need to have also sustainable agriculture. So that gives me the occasion to turn to Josefa. As said by the minister, we can say that food security goes hand in hand with sustainable and resilient agriculture models. And also that is what will enable food systems to adapt in the changing environment we have and the changing landscape of agriculture, specifically when ecological is key for agriculture and in a large scale, where we need to really have a green revolution. So in that landscape, I'll have 2 first questions in opening to Mrs. Her Excellency Sako. How do you think climate change is impacting African agriculture? That's the first one. And the second one, is the development of sustainable agriculture a priority for our government? In the speech of Ms. Diziza, it's something very important in South Africa, but globally, is it a priority today for our government?
Thank you very much, Chair, Moderator. I will first of all like to acknowledge the presence of Honorable Diziza, Minister of Agriculture and Land Reform, and the chairperson of the STC, African Union STC for Agriculture, Rural Development, Water, and the Environment. And I also like to thank you very much, Honorable Minister, for your commitment to the agriculture agenda. You are always available to support us, bring us more clarity on what this agriculture, and put agriculture's agenda on a very high level, through you, through your tenureship as a minister and a member of the parliament. Thank you very much for your commitment for this agenda. It is all our agenda, but we are really, as leaders, leaders, we are putting it at a very high level because it's a very important sector for our economy. I will also like to acknowledge the presence of my dear brother, Director, Dr. Abebe, the director, regional director for FAO, and thank you for its short, very short notice that you really made sure that you joined this panel. It's important because we need to communicate on the continent. We need to communicate, and FAO, it's really our strategic partners with African Union, and we need a lot of insight from FAO, and we'll be getting a lot of support to your mandate as the director, regional director. We are really working very well. I would also like to thank Dr. Auguste from AU AUDA. It is our own African Union development, the development department of African Union. So thank you very much for all of you to respond, positively to this panel, to be part of this panel. And Minister, I also commend your introduction, your keynote address, which was very rich, and it really helps all the participants to know that we are really working, and it is a priority, area of our continent. So going back to your question, Abdul, how is climate change impacting African agriculture? Climate change is emerging as a major challenge to Africa, to agricultural development in Africa. Before the COVID, we've been having a lot of stress, and according to the 2007 report of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, they state that Africa is the region that will be more affected and is more vulnerable to climate change. This is due to multiple stress of poor infrastructure, poverty, as well as governance. Those are the report is very clear on its own that this region is really very, very, very vulnerable for the climate change. And in that same report is saying that the increasingly unpredictable and the erratic nature of weather system on the continent have placed an extra burden on food security and the rural livelihood. The minister have said so. The widespread destructions of life, farms, and home. And one concrete example we had last year here on the continent was the cyclone Idai and Bennett that really, caused a lot of human loss of life, destructions, and farms destruction, and the economic disruption as well, which occurred in Mozambique, Malawi, as well as Zimbabwe. That was really a very, very, very serious, weather extreme shocks that the continent had an experience. And we also had the El Nino in South Africa, which demonstrated the extent, that Africa is exposed to the climate change. And with this, I would like to commend the organizer to really bring the issue of resilience and sustainability in this debate that we are having today. Because with the lesson that we are learning, because COVID-19 is still with us. So the lesson we are learning is that we need to build resilience. And we've been talking throughout all the series of these webinars that we are doing since we started in Central Africa. We went to West Africa. Last year we were here at the horn of Africa, the East Africa. Now we are, exchanging with Madam Minister from South Africa to have the view, and our own general, introduction she did. I think it's mainstream. It's about all the region that are suffering more or less, but they are having the same problem on this region. So that is one of the problems. And the third one is the drought, desertification. We have the drought. It started. We have the drought in the Sahel region That is why at the African Union, we have this strategy of the Great Green Wall, initiative, project, program, so that we can, prevent the desertification and, protect the environment. And we also have droughts. The drought is really very serious. Now we are having a lot of drought in the southern region, the SADC region. There we have the droughts, and the African Union is trying to really build resilience in this area. And we are negotiating with the German parliament that they want really to assist us, in mitigating the drought, even in the Horn of Africa. So all these dynamics, all these conversation, all this negotiation is going on. And we apart from it, we have also one of the big things is the shrinking of Lake Chad. As you know, Lake Chad, about 6 countries depend on their livelihood, the citizen, the community, they depend on the Lake Chad water, that river. And with the shrinking, it's causing a lot of problem, putting it more easier in terms of recruitment of the youth that are there to go to Boko Haram. That is affecting seriously Nigeria and also Cameroon region. So those are the type of thing that where nature, when you don't manage it very well, it rises to conflicts. We also have conflicts between the farmers and the cattle herders. All these are issues that climate change is bringing and is affecting the production, because we don't have a secure environment in order to produce, and the livelihood of our farmer is also at a threat. So those things are really, we really need to look at it as one of the hotspots also in the food insecurity. So we should not divert, you should not just concentrate on COVID response, but on the COVID response, we have to look at it. That is why the minister has already said on the 16th of April, we had our ministerial under the chairmanship of Madam Minister, and we have, identified some areas that we need to respond, but we want to make it an holistic approach, not just on the concentrating on the immediate. We want a post COVID recovery program, and we'll be working very well with FAO, all our team, the World Bank. We have a task force that Madam Minister launched it, and the task force is working. And I want to share with you, on Monday we are going to report to our chair and our bureau, the STC bureau. We are going to report on progress since we had our ministerial ministerial for the response. So, and the second question you asked me is the development of sustainable agriculture. Is it a priority for the government?
Exactly. Of course, the commitment of the state.
Hello?
I was saying the commitment of the states. Yes, is it a priority for the government?
Of course it is. Of course it is. It is a priority for our government. When you look at the structure where I am a commissioner, the fact that having a department on agriculture means that the African leaders, head of state and government, have decided, have really prioritized agriculture as part of the, one of the priority of us. Otherwise, we will not have a Department of Agriculture under the African Union structure. So that one is one of them. And under this structure, we have the Malabo Declaration. Under the Malabo Declaration it's on accelerated agricultural growth and transformation for shared prosperity and improved livelihood. This declaration was adopted by our head of state in June 2014. And under this declaration, the commitment, they made 7 commitments. Commitment number 7 and number 6, it states that to enhance the resilience of livelihood and production system to climate variability and other related risks. That's just to tell you that this is really a concern. And then we have our biannual review report where we can track progress of our member countries in terms of this thematic that you brought and that we're going to discuss. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Excellency Joseph. So it's in your statement, it's quite clear that resilience and sustainability is key, because It's not a must-have, but we are facing real challenges through the continent, and we need really to have it on mind in every country and put priorities to be sure that we will have the response for a resilient and sustainable agriculture, because it's key for our food security and to feed our population. Welcome, Dr. Abebe. We are happy to have you here and welcome you in the presentation. Before you come, I was giving an overview of your background as Assistant Director General of FAO and Regional Representative for Africa. Like our other panelists, you are an expert in agricultural sector. We are happy in these different panels, and thanks to Mrs. Josefa Sako from the African Union to have real people who are in the ground and giving insights that are not only theoretical, but really happening on the field. And that's important. And I think all the people who are following us are happy to have these leadership insights from our continent and from the different regions. So you are in the sector since more than 30 years and working for the FAO now, who is also a multilateral organization really present in this area. And in her introductive speech, Her Excellency Minister Didier talked about the meeting you had with the ministers, African Union and FAO on April, focusing on all these issues of crisis. So just in an opening speech, how can you give us the view of FAO on this crisis and what responses are on the ground today, and how you are gathering African countries to be resilient facing this COVID crisis?
Thank you, Mr. Diop, for that introduction. Honorable Minister Idiza, Her Excellency Commissioner, Ambassador Josefa Sako, my brother Augustine from Nepal, greetings to you to all. Let me start by expressing my appreciation for the leadership that the Honorable Minister Didiza, as well as Her Excellency Commissioner, have been playing in really putting the agenda of response to COVID-19 to address challenges of the food systems in Africa on the map, not just on Africa, but also on the world. And this at a time when the attention of the whole world was focused on the health aspect of the pandemic, only the health aspect, without paying attention to the issues of food security and livelihoods. This needs to be acknowledged, and I want to thank them for that. I also would like to thank them for associating FAO in this noble endeavor. It has been a privilege for FAO and for myself personally to have been accompanying their efforts in leading Africa along this battle. Now, in Africa, I'm speaking after this powerful speeches by our leaders, the minister and commissioner. So on one hand, it is easier for me to speak since they have defined the issues. On the other hand, it would be a bit difficult for me to be more innovative without repeating what they have said, because I completely agree with what they have stated already. Now, the kind of challenge that African countries face. On the one hand, there is this high exposure and vulnerability to various kinds of exogenous shocks. And this characterizes Africa's economies, the livelihood systems. And these shocks could be related to international trade, the natural disasters, the transboundary pests and diseases, such as, for example, the desert locust in Eastern Africa, but now some of the alerts are indicating that spreading to the Central and Western and also Southern Africa. Proliferation of conflicts in Africa, in all places nearly. So this is one side of the story. But on the other hand, the vulnerable groups, there are many, and there are many, we're talking about millions and millions of people. And these vulnerable systems, including production and livelihood systems, they are not adequately protected against these shocks. So social protection and safety net programs remain weak. As a result, there exist few mechanisms to mitigate the impacts. So what would make the situation in Africa unique is that, and compared to other regions also hit by this pandemic, is that these shocks do overlap and come as waves with cumulative negative impacts. Many other regions, especially in developed countries, are dealing with the pandemic only. In Africa, it is not like that. It's an overlap of crisis over crisis and so on. So even before COVID-19 pandemic, about 239 million people were food insecure. 65 million people were in acute food insecurity status. About 413 million people live in poverty. So COVID-19 is an addition to these waves of shocks and strikes right at the center of this high vulnerability. The pandemic led to disruptions in food supply systems, the chains, which compromise the ability of vulnerable groups to access food, thus exposing the inadequacies of existing social protection and safety net programs across the continent. The other aspect is of the vulnerability again on the production side. Agriculture in Africa is season-sensitive preoccupation. Much of it is dependent on weather conditions and patterns. So timely availability of farm inputs and operation of activities determine the level of food production and productivity. Disruptions in input supply chains, such as seeds, fertilizer, animal feed, or mobility of labor will destabilize the production system with consequences not just in the short term, but also in the medium and long term. So in this context, in the context of COVID-19, FAO, in collaboration with partners, is supporting the efforts of member countries in different ways. First, the objective is to keep agriculture supply chains alive while protecting the safety and well-being of everyone working along the food chain. So in other words, we need to prevent the health crisis to be translated into a food security crisis. We want to do this in an integrated manner. The two are linked. So it means keeping the domestic food supply value chains functioning, including sustained flow of agriculture inputs such as seeds and planting materials, animal feed to producers, as well as keeping trade routes open. While doing this, and the second goal is to address the needs of the most vulnerable and scale up social protection programs, including social safety nets. Just give you the data at the moment, only about 10% of the population in sub-Saharan Africa are covered under some sort of social safety nets. This is different. This makes African situation different. And how we are doing this, we have been stepping up advocacy. As I said at the beginning, everyone's attention was focused for quite the right reason on the health aspect of it. And therefore governments rushed towards locking down indiscriminately. FAO, together with African Union and other partners, argued and provided data and evidence that we need to protect the food systems. We need to treat food systems as essential functions, and therefore the measures need to take into account. Yeah. So FAO has been also supporting the development of sound policies and investments. At the end of the day, it's about investments and strengthening capacity for delivery. Also strengthening multi-sectoral approaches, and also mobilizing strategic partnerships and international cooperation. I'm very glad that both Honorable Minister as well as Her Excellency Commissioner have mentioned about the joint African Union and FAO effort towards really bringing the high-level policymakers around the table. The meeting on the 16th of April of Agriculture Ministers, now we are talking about bringing other ministers, such as Ministers of Trade, Ministers of Finance, to discuss about these issues, because this is a joint agenda. And also bringing around the table significant players, such as the World Bank, the African Development Bank, the European Commission, the IFAD, the World Food Programme, of course, with the leadership of the African Union and Honorable Minister. This is some of the things which FAO has been supporting. We have been supporting cross-sectoral and multi-sectoral approaches. I mentioned already bringing on board Ministers of Trade and Finance, and engaging other stakeholders such as civil society organizations, private sector, parliamentarians, and so on. And doing this at multiple levels. At country level, we work with the UN country teams, coordinated by the resident coordinator of the United Nations, supporting governments, doing assessments of impacts, as well as developing response plans. This is happening in nearly all countries as we speak. At sub-regional level, we have been working with regional economic communities, and SADC included. Today we're talking about Southern Africa, but with ECOWAS, with IGAD, with ECAS, with SEALS, with Eastern African Community. We have been doing the same, and they are coming up with strategies also that will bring together their respective members. At the regional level, I have already mentioned, and of course, Commissioner and Her Excellency Honorable Minister also mentioned, with the African Union, a very strong engagement. Now, we are also supporting, FAO is supporting the promotion and adoption of promising innovations to reach millions of people, such as digital agriculture. And finally, we believe that sustainable solution in the long term resides in building resilience of production as well as livelihood systems in Africa, for precisely the same reason I have said at the beginning. This will enable systems to absorb the shocks, to build back better, and for more effective preparedness to deal with risks of exposure to a future shock, because we know that the shocks are coming. They are there, they will continue to come. We need to be prepared. I thank you. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Abebe, for this overview of what you are doing in the ground. We are happy to know that it's a real cooperation that is in the sector between the African Union, FAO, and all the governments of the continent, trying to see how to take advantage of this opportunity to go together and to fight together this pandemic, and to also to be sure. You have talked about disruption. I think it's the third time I'm hearing disruption in this conference. Disruption. We are in a disruptive situation. We need to bring real solutions that will allow us to move forward. We have heard a lot of actions coming from multilateral organizations, coming from the government. I would like to ask Dr. Augustin, which is in charge of the Comprehensive African Agriculture Development Program in Nepal. Dr. Augustin, one question comes to me in mind, and I will ask it to you. How can we bring in this action the private sector? Because we have talked at this stage of government, multilateral organization. And I think that private sector need perhaps to jumping and to join to the effort. How can it work on your point of view?
Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator. I would like once again to thank Her Excellency Commissioner on behalf of the African Union Development Agency for associating us with this important endeavor. I would like to thank Honorable Minister Diziza and my brother, Dr. Abebe. I very much enjoy your respective submissions on this important topic. Before I touch on the issue of private sector role in helping the continent to navigate the COVID during the COVID time and beyond COVID, I wanted first to recall that we are actually operating under a framework that is, in my understanding, very clear, which we all know, which is the Malabo Declaration, which has set the vision for the agricultural transformation of the continent. If we were to go back to that particular document, that piece of document that was released in 2014, all the key issues that we are raising today are well captured in the Malabo Declaration. This is to suggest that that declaration was very visionary. The issue of resilience building, how do we manage risk? They are very central into that declaration. This is point number one. The point number two I wanted to share is that if we were to say that we have learned anything from the COVID so far, it is to say that the COVID has worked as a magnifier to show to us as a continent the areas where improvements, massive improvements are needed, where we need to do more. Mentioning the issue of risk is not just a lip service. We should be very serious about it. It is also because we were not able to walk the talk on these key issues that we are finding ourselves today poorly prepared to face the challenges that the COVID is posing. Now, with this understanding, I wanted to suggest that we are all in agreement. It seems to me that the role of the private sector is very key. In the past, most probably like 10 years back, we witnessed the challenges that governments and private sector actors were facing in coming together to work together to address the issue of agricultural transformation. Through our facilitation, we were able to, and that of partners, we were able to build the platform where the key parties will come together and build consensus on who does what, how central the role of the private sector is. Since the COVID started, at the level of the agency, we put together an effort whereby we mobilize some partners to look into how to bring in private sector in several thematic issues, including education, including tourism and hospitality, and including agriculture. Agriculture is one of them, where we witness a serious impact, negative impact of the private sector, of the COVID in disrupting the supply chain, both at the global level, continental and national. So one thing that we're trying to do is to see how can we bring, facilitate the conversation to ensure that the people who have a voice are heard, that the private sector who are supposed to make the food system function optimally, besides the government putting together the framework, the environment to allow business to flow. How do we make sure that the people who are supposed to be in the driver's seat are really driving the process? So beyond mobilizing stakeholders to come together and share their views, we have put together a framework that is called the Comprehensive, the Country Agribusiness Partnership Framework, CAPEF, which is a mechanism put together, we developed jointly with the African Union Development Agency and the AUC DREA and some private sector stakeholders, which is a framework that brings together all partners to agree on how do we set direction, how do we make sure that we can mobilize the willing contribution in the country to allow private sector investment to flow into the value chains. So our approach is to go a value chain approach to the issues, because we cannot start addressing issues in the vacuum. So the main framework is the CADEP, as I mentioned, which is the driver for the Malabo Declaration. And when it comes to bringing in private sector, we use the CAPEF as a vehicle to make sure that we structure the type of deals that are required for us to gain some traction along the strategic value chains. With this understanding, we are beginning to see that private sector compensation or role in the agricultural transformation is no longer a by-the-way issue. It has now become something that is very much considered in the main scheme of things. More importantly, in this particular time, we can see that the governments themselves are able to acknowledge and also do what it takes to facilitate the environment for the private sector investment to flow in more in the sector. Beyond the current situation that we are going through, I think more effort will be needed. We will have to discuss how we structure a better dialogue between the government and the people who are willing to invest the resources in the strategic value chains, so that we don't look at national agricultural investment plans as something that is only owned by the government. The government should be seen as a facilitator, as a conduit for the farmers and the investors to be able to take and drive. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Augustine. So dialogue is important, and we need to bring in private sector as specifically in investing in all these important areas and sector, which is agriculture. Thank you, and we'll come back and dig further on this topic. I know that Her Excellency Minister Didiza will leave in a few minutes, so I'll perhaps just ask a last question before you are leaving. I know that you have a parliamentary session, so we are already happy to have you for 1 hour. So a last question, Excellency. What are the strategies you put in place now? You have give us some flavor in your introduction to really create real sustainable and resilient agriculture, and how are you working at a regional level?
Thank you very much, Chairperson of the session, and thanks to the panelists for the input that they've made. And indeed, I agree with the NEPAD presentation that the Malabo Declaration was indeed visionary, ahead of its time. And I will say also the 2002 Maputo Summit Declaration on the investment that is required to be made in agriculture by countries. And I'm sure all of us have appreciated that had we done all of these things in time, we probably would have absorbed the shocks better. So you are asking what strategies are we putting in place currently? Just want to share that beyond the interventions that we made, we are working with the producers, farmer organizations, civil society, as well as other government departments to look at how actually do we reinvest in a much more targeted way, on our agricultural sector. 2 days ago, we had the investment symposium in the country that brings in a number of stakeholders to look at infrastructure growth, because in our view, it's important to actually look at the infrastructure investment in agriculture, particularly to extend our irrigation capacity, to deal with post-harvest losses, to deal with issues of storage, particularly in those underdeveloped areas of our country. It's also clear to us that without the good network industries, particularly your roads, without your transportation systems in terms of rail for logistics, without looking at port expansion, as well as telecommunications, I mean, we're meeting here now on this webinar. I'm thinking of some of our far-flung areas in our countries, and South Africa being included, that it's not easy to actually even have a webinar with farmers like this, because we do not have necessary tools such as your networks and signals that can make sure that you attend to those webinars with those communities that you require. So that's one issue that we've agreed we needed to deal with. Secondly, we've also agreed that we need to shift our focus and look at district interventions, so that we can be able, at a minute level, understand what are the challenges that we are facing in agriculture, how do we support it in a much more concerted way. Given the various levels of government we have, provincial and municipality, we actually have agreed that in the way in which we have to work, we need to actually ensure that district delivery model become the way in which we actually operate as a government, in order to be able to get at the lowest level where our communities are. Issues of agricultural financing, I'm sure some of you through Medium, you had seen that our agricultural land bank has been struggling. Yesterday, the Minister of Finance, on his supplementary budget, he actually announced the recapitalization of the agricultural land bank to make sure that you do have a range of financing systems that are there to be able to support farmers. Extension service and farmer settlement support remains key to be able to deal with farmers' needs and their support at a local level. So there are various of these strategies that we are looking at. The other element that for us is becoming important is how do we work as government in partnership with the private sector, because some of the things that we require will need partnership between us and the private sector to be able to address, not leaving out our communities through their civil society organization, because they remain actually key. So these are some of the issues that I can mention briefly as some of our interventions in dealing with this matter as a country. But our regional, through the work that Commissioner Joseph Asako and team are doing with our RECs, will actually require us as ministers of agriculture and environment and social development, particularly at a regional level, find a way in which we can work together to look at how do we support, agriculture, as well as the shocks that sometimes are experienced by the producers. We are planning, and I hope it will be successful, African AU meeting rather, with ministers of finance and trade, because without those key ministers in the agricultural strategy, we may not actually go very far. Thank you very much. That will be my parting shot.
Thank you very much, Her Excellency Minister Didiza. We are really happy to have this exchange and insight, and thank you for taking your time even between two meetings, and we're happy to...
Maybe the last issue.
Yeah.
Maybe the last issue before I leave, because it was raised on one of the charts. The issue of addressing young people and their entry into the agricultural sector and how we support them, in my view, is critical, not only looking at the present, but also looking at the future of the agricultural sector in our continent. Similarly, the support and directed interventions to supporting women in agriculture, particularly because it is a majority of them who you'll find operating at a smallholder and at a subsistence level, which is very key for household food security. I think it's important that as countries, in terms of our policies, in terms of our programmatic intervention and regulatory environment, we actually become targeted as well to these two sectors of our community.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Minister. And on the name of the organizer and myself and all our followers, we say thank you and happy to have you, and hope that we'll have other occasion to discuss again on these important topics for the continent.
Thank you very much, but I've left one of my senior officials, Mr. Ramasodi, who's also the chair of the technical committee of the AUSTC, to continue participating in the forum. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. We have talked a lot about how all the stakeholders can work together, and in the last words of Her Excellency Minister Didiza, she was saying that we need to have not only agriculture minister, but Minister of Economy, Minister of Finance. For sure, it's a whole model that has to be built if we want to have sustainable agriculture in the continent. And that's where I will turn to Her Excellency Commissioner Sako. It's important to have, if we want to have sustainable agriculture production, to really involve entrepreneurship in the initiative. That's, for me, something key. I was talking about later on private sector, and entrepreneurship is also key to develop agriculture. So can you tell us what are the initiatives that are taken in that area, and link it to that also how technology is also important to support a healthier agriculture economy?
Yes, as you know that our comprehensive agriculture, African Agriculture Development Program, which is CADEP, seeks to drive our continental agricultural revolution. This is the transformative agenda that we have on the continent. So we want really to go to agricultural revolution by increasing investment in agriculture, fostering entrepreneurship, and investing in agribusiness and agri-food value chain, improving national and regional agriculture market, fostering African collective food security, and improving the management of natural resources. All these are within, the mandate of this continental flagship program. African Union is also promoting digital and precision agriculture. We are also promoting the climate smart agriculture. As you know that your first question to me was on the impact of climate change. So there is new model of climate smart agriculture. It's very important at this time to really, go through the climate smart agriculture. Of course, we need to make sound policies so that we can mainstream it in order to implement it, for action and implementation on this type of model. So all these are efforts that we are making in order to really modernize agriculture, find a new model, and also assure that the entrepreneurship is really, a reality, because agriculture should live from subsistence model of agriculture to a lucrative, where, people, the small older farmers are making profit. And if we want to attract today the youth, into this business, they have to, they really have to get profit, merit, or this thing. So this type of new model of the agripreneur, and the agripreneur and investing in all value chain, it's really, really a priority for the African Union to achieve, his goal of ending hunger by 2025, and also, creating employment, job for our youth, and reducing automatically poverty. So it goes with the two Agenda 2030 and the SDGs, and as well as Agenda 2063. while efforts by the African government in the international organization has been intensified in reducing the impact of climate change, including spending about, our governments are spending about 2% of their GDP on adaptation. And there are some barriers and limitation, more significant perhaps the finance, that the issue of finance. All these we are really looking at it very well, so that all these initiatives that we have access to finance, and really make sure that we have to reach where we want to reach. Another perspective we are looking is due to the issues of climate change, we have put in place in African Union 3 commissions, to really address, this issue of climate change and go to development, go to the transformation and development. We have the Sahel Climate Commission, which they are working very well in terms of programs to bring families back to that ecosystem, instead of them to go to the issue of terrorism, insecurity on that area. We want to really make sure that desertification does not expand the desertification. Another program, we have the Congo Basin. As you know, Congo Basin is the second biggest basin forest, after the Amazon, and it plays a very, very, very key role. It has a very key role on the environment. The service it plays for the environment, to mitigate all this climate change and global warming is very important. And we know that a lot of countries derive their livelihood and the community there. So we really want to concentrate there so that we can still keep that canopy of forest, but also, derive, also utilize the national resources sustainably, so that we can ensure that the next generation have access to that. This is another basin. And the third one, it is the island state, African island state. We know that the African island state are the most vulnerable to the climate, to the extreme weather events. So we want also under this the African island state develop, unlock the potential, so that the communities that live there, the people, those populations have access to their own normal livelihood from those from all this. So all these type of initiatives are very important for us to really build resilience. This is the topic to build resilience on those parts of this thing, because when we look at another big strategy that we just came out is the blue economy. We have at least 36 countries which are on the coastline, so we need also to make sure that we implement our green blue economy strategy on the continent. All this is to transform agriculture and make sure that we secure food security and the nutrition on the continent.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Sako, for this angle of view, how entrepreneurship can be involved and key for that, and how technology also is very important to have a resilient and sustainable agriculture. One of the points I can raise in the discussion is in this objective of modernizing agriculture, industrialization, and also transformation of agriculture, making it something which will be attractive for the youth. One of my questions is, how can we, in one side, push private sector to come in and to have intensive and industrial agriculture, and in the other side, be sure that those small farmers won't be left aside? And I will turn to Dr. Augustine and see what are your insights on that. How can we manage to be sure that private sector will come in and bring this transformation of agriculture, but we will not leave aside all those small farmers who are less in technology, in mechanization, and so on?
Thank you very much, moderator. I think that helps to clarify some of the conventional knowledge that for far too long we have had on the continent. We on the continent at times are forced to pick between small and big, between medium and big, which in essence defeats the purpose of what the Malabo Declaration was there for. I think I keep going back to it because that's is my understanding, the foundation for everything that we are trying to achieve. Head of states made a very deliberate decision to give priority to smallholder farmers. So this is not to say that we don't consider the big players as important, but if it was for a very simple reason. Smallholder farmers or smallholders in general, whether they are in the logistics component of the value chain, or whether they are in the processing segment of the value chain, the small turn to find it more difficult to make it to the finishing line. So it was a deliberate decision to ensure that there is a clear focus put on them. So this is what we are doing. We have, as a continent, an important program called Grow Africa, which is basically meant to help structure the business deals, as I mentioned, to mobilize private sector investment into the implementation of the national agricultural investment plans in countries. And the way we operate gives enough room for smallholder farmers to be in the driver's seat the way we see it along the key value chains. We don't believe that a single group can help transform the picture as it is. It's a matter of us having a smart blending of partnership between small and big farmers or big operators to help connect the smaller ones to the market along the key value chains. So this is an approach that we should be looking at. We shouldn't be forced as a continent to choose into small and big, or we are not in the either or situation. We can only make it if we pull together in one single direction, with, of course, a particular focus being put on the smallholder farmers, which in any case are the biggest chunk of our producing force. Whether we talk about access to market or even ability to process or access to technology, this is another area where we believe more has to be done by Africa as a continent. We are seeing that going into the post-COVID will be another challenge on its own. How do we navigate that terrain will show our ability to learn from the lessons that the past is here to show us. We are finding ourselves in this situation to a large extent because we have neglected our ability to, we didn't build our ability to be proactive in managing risk. We took for granted the fate of smallholder farmers. We didn't do the right thing when we needed to do them. We didn't do them right enough for us to reap the benefit today. So going into the post-COVID time will be a very interesting move. We will be watched by our countries, our stakeholders on the type of responses that we are offering them, because our role is to help them put together solutions that are going to work for the type of challenges that they are facing. So in a nutshell, I'm saying that yes, private sector has a key role to play. When I say private sector, I don't mean big players. I mean both people with deeper pocket and smallholder farmers, or small in terms of size along the key value chains. So we have to pull this together and deliver a comprehensive solution to complex challenges that the continent is facing. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Augustine. It's a balance to do between how to put in industrialization, development, equipment and technology, and to embark also small farmers to be sure that we won't leave someone in the field. And that's important, I think, as you say, for the development of agriculture in our continent. Dr. Abe, just to continue in our in the same sense of our discussion, we have talked about how you're working on helping countries to face COVID, but in a more global landscape, how is FAO working and which strategies are in place to really have sustainable and resilient agriculture in Africa?
Okay, thank you so much, Mr. Deb. A very interesting discussion, very lively, very rich. I just want to come back to the significance of smallholder agriculture in Africa. This is very important because, as you know, the majority, more than 65% on average in Africa, live in rural areas and depend directly or indirectly on agriculture, not just for food, as a source of food, but as a source of livelihood, as source of their income. And so agriculture for them is also a way of life. So we should always remember this fact, whether we are talking about transformation or resilience building. You know, the fact of the matter is these are the units in Africa. And this also makes the context of COVID a little bit different from other regions. At the moment, the COVID keeps going up in Africa. Geographically, it seems to be more concentrated in urban centers. And all efforts should be made towards making sure that it does not spread to rural areas. By the time this is allowed to happen, we are hitting right at the source of our livelihoods, the majority of the people, which makes it very difficult to even control given the capacities that exist in rural areas. Even later alone that in urban areas, it's even difficult. So when other countries, other regions who were hit by the pandemic in Europe, in other places, they are talking about reaching the climax, the plateau, and then the curve going down, and therefore easing the restrictions of economic activities and so on. The African curve, the pandemic is still on the increase. And we do not know when we are going to reach that plateau and for it to start. But at the same time, in other regions, now information is coming out that there is a second wave of spread of the virus and so on. So we are not sure at the moment, we are not certain as to when that post-COVID situation is going to set in the case of Africa. All the indications are that we're going to live with it for a relatively longer period of time, and we should be prepared for that. Now, it's an extraordinary situation. What I'm trying to say is this is a very extraordinary situation. It requires a very extraordinary response. FAO also considers this as an opportunity. It's a challenge, but it's an opportunity. Our approach towards addressing the SDGs, in particular SDGs 1 and 2, but in general, could be encapsulated, our Director General encapsulates it into a kind of 4 concepts. One is better production of agriculture. And when I talk about agriculture, it's about crops, livestock, fisheries, forestry, and so on. So better production. The second is better nutrition. The third is better environment. And the fourth is better life. Okay. Now, let me link this with the situation and why it can be considered as an opportunity. As you know, Africa is a net importer of food at the continent, and tens of billions of dollars have been spent on importing food items from the rest of the world. So it means we are a big market for the rest of the world. The local production seems to be delinked from this big market. In other words, local production means the smallholder production. Augustine has spoken about the neglect, the policy neglect, as a result, the price that we are paying at the moment, and we continue to do so. The key is in really prioritizing agriculture, not just through empty words, empty commitments, phony commitments, I would call them, but real commitments that can be measured by investments. Allocation of, if it is a priority, then you have to increase the investment. You can't say it is a priority and yet you don't allocate resources and attention. We're paying the price. That's why Africa is increasingly importing food items. And when the pandemic, such as COVID-19 hit, there has been a lot of disruptions. The prices have increased, shortages of food supplies in the countries, and a lot of panic. So this is a time, it's a kind of wake-up call that Africa needs to give real priority to smallholder production, to increase production, local production of smallholder agriculture without excluding other forms of organization of farming. Smallholder agriculture. When we do that, we know the mix of production by the smallholder is nutritionally rich. The focus on production, local production, would automatically translate into better nutrition. We don't have to grapple with food items that are produced in a different environment, which are not nutritionally desirable, rich, or even have issues to do with food safety and healthy diets. It's also about reducing waste and loss, food loss. Crops, vegetables, fruits. What happened in West Africa and many countries, and I'm sure this is in other places also, because of the lockdowns, the farmers who have already harvested the vegetables, the fruits, could not make it to the market. And as a result, they have lost. We're talking about post-harvest loss of between 25 and up to 40%. This is an opportunity to really invest in value-adding enterprises and investment so that we can have more food through local production as well as improved nutrition. When it comes to better environment, Commissioner has talked about climate smart agriculture and other innovative approaches. In Africa, in the rural areas, I think the way to go is to make sure that we make our production in an environmentally sustainable manner through different ways. FAO has been supporting ecological restoration initiatives, climate smart agriculture, I have mentioned it. And finally, I think the key is to make sure that this whole thing is really done in a manner that is economically viable. We cannot expect our smallholders to produce more, to produce nutritious food, to reduce waste and loss, and also to produce in an environmentally sustainable manner without being motivated, without benefiting from their effort. And therefore, the smallholder agriculture needs to be organized in an economically viable manner. When it becomes viable, it also addresses the issue of attracting the youth towards this venture. When I say smallholder agriculture, in the African context, on all our studies and reports indicate that the majority is actually operated by women. So it's about improving the gender equality as well as promoting women empowerment that we are talking about. So this equation, if we take it as an opportunity, and I have already spoken about the opportunities through digital agriculture and so on to promote technologies, communication, and so on, we can convert it into a real opportunity. But it requires leadership. Leadership, government leadership, effective leadership. The agenda is not only of the ministers of agriculture. It should be co-owned, it should be co-shared. And one of the things which we have been pushing for in the countries is for this kind of initiatives to be defined as initiatives, presidential initiatives, or prime minister initiatives, who have the capacity to bring around the table the relevant ministries and also introduce a sense of mutual accountability at that level. I know Madam Commissioner, she has been leading this effort in the context of the Malabo Declaration, the biennial review and reporting as part of the mutual accountability. I would like to encourage all of, the Commissioner and NEPAD and all of us to also do it at the country level. Countries cannot talk about mutual accountability when they meet at the heads of state level in African Union meetings when they don't have that system of accountability at the country level. And FAO is supporting towards strengthening the monitoring systems, both the planning and monitoring and reporting systems. Let me stop here. Thank you. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Doctor, for this insight. And in the same way, you are answering some question we raised in our chat, because people were talking about women empowerment, about accountability, and I think that it's issues that you have answered. So for the last round of discussion, I'll try to go through some questions and ask to each of you how to react on it. One of the questions about food sovereignty and agroecology, and the question was, food sovereignty and agroecology offers alternative systems that put both people and protection of environment at its heart. What is stopping African governments embracing agroecology and food sovereignty as a key solution for resilience and eradicating hunger? What is today the challenges that makes that African governments are not embracing agroecology and food sovereignty as a key factor for sustainability and fighting hunger? Mrs. Sako, I'll let you that question.
Can you come again? Because I was already preparing to get to leave the panel, because I'm going to be a moderator on another panel. Can you come again?
Yes, it's a question on today food sovereignty and agroecology offers alternative system that put both people and protection of environment in its heart. What is stopping African governments embracing agroecology and food sovereignty as a key solution for resilience and eradication of hunger?
We are going to have our own summit on food system next year. And at the African Union Commission, we are already, engaging with our RECs and our member states to prepare this type of response. It is true that we need a strong food sovereignty. We need to be sovereign. We need to have food sovereignty on our continent. This is really one of the lessons learned from COVID-19. We saw that Dr. Abebe said that we are food importer, a continent that has such arable land. We have water, we have good climate. We don't, we cannot justify why we don't have food sovereignty on our continent. So that is why we need to really rebuild and revisit our food system. You know, all this is about the food system. We are going to have the global summit next year, but with all these, this series of a webinar we're going through, we are trying to get ourselves, more familiar of what is happening region by region. Because before we used to, before the COVID, we used to have free movement. We could travel and have meetings at the country level. But this webinar is helping us to understand better the fragility of country by country or region by region, on this food system issue. Of course, we need to go agroecology, because we need to also protect. That is why the nexus livelihoods, food system, and environment, it's very, very important. We need to address it seriously, and we are working on that. I think Dr. Abebe will hand over, from the FAO perspective, because they are more on the field. We are more on policies and the strategy. He can, also add on what I'm saying. With this, I really thank you. No, they haven't called me, but when they will call me, I will have to leave to go and moderate the other panel.
I will thank you, Commissioner Sako. I will leave to Dr. Abebe and Dr. Augustine for the last words before closing this session.
Okay, thank you so much. These are very big questions. The elephant in a room, I would call it, when it comes to Africa. Let me start from agroecology. Well, agroecology, we have been developing frameworks for agroecology. And this is based on applying ecological concepts and principles to optimize interactions between plants, animals, humans, and the environment, while taking into consideration the social aspects that needs to be addressed for sustainable and fair food system. So FAO has been at the forefront in championing this. You may have heard me even in my earlier interventions, trying to even using the framework of better production, better nutrition, better environment, better life, and linking this with the smallholder agriculture in Africa, and also the ecological restoration and so on. So it is not lack of knowledge. If we're not practicing it in Africa, it's not because we do not know what needs to be done. There is a lot of knowledge. FAO facilitates experience sharing on this, and it requires champions. It requires champions. It doesn't just happen like that. But also, let's not forget that it has some quarters who are not feeling very comfortable about these ones. But I can assure you that this is one of the things which FAO prioritizes and supports in the countries. When it comes to food sovereignty, it's a much more complex, concept, and it asserts that the people who produce, who distribute and consume food should control the mechanisms and policies of food production and distribution. Okay, so this is a political issue. It's a political issue. It's a sovereignty, and it's not easy to come up with consensus. And again, there are powerful groups who do not feel comfortable on this concept. I want us to relate this, how we can address it also in the context of the Africa continental free trade area. Okay, the food sovereignty doesn't mean that each country should be dependent on 100% for what it needs. It is not about against trade and so on. So it's about power. It's about who should control the mechanisms and the policies of food production and distribution. Okay, so from our perspective, we are in favor of supporting those stakeholders from across the whole value chain, because the food system is not just what is happening at the farm level. It is from planting, using crops as an example, all the way to the food on the table. And along this chain, there are so many actors and stakeholders. So who should be in control of the mechanisms and policies guiding food production and distribution and consumption? We believe that it should be, managed by the stakeholders, not by external bodies. And it requires a lot of effort towards building that kind of concern. So I will leave it, I think, to the good hand of Her Excellency, Madam Commissioner. As I said, these are some of the things that the political platform would find some solution. But we will definitely support. Over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Abebe. Dr. Augustine, the last word.
Thank you very much. I think the last point made by Dr. Abebe is very important. I just wanted to add to the explanation that he gave that there is an important accountability dimension into the food sovereignty issue. Here it is about, in addition to what has been said before, is about making sure that the key players that are involved in the whole process, from production to final consumption, have an opportunity to come together and look into what food means for a particular country. This is a political decision that has to be made to allow this type of conversation to take place, for people to appreciate for themselves why would they go for rice or meat or for something else produced locally or sourced from external market to meet the demand of the country. That means the political leadership has to create that opportunity, but also the other players have the leverage to put pressure on the people who are making decisions for them to make the right decision for the decision that is right for the country. I also wanted to add something to suggest that it will not be easy to achieve food sovereignty as an individual country. With what we are looking at the moment, with the AFCFTA coming into force, we will no longer be looking at Cameroon or Zambia as a single country. We'll be looking at two countries acting, taking into account what their actions are having as impact on the neighbors and beyond. That means the dialogue about food security and food sovereignty has to be held in an inclusive manner for the continent to appreciate what is good for the people of the continent, and for the people of the continent to have an opportunity to influence the agenda setting. On the issue, this is what I wanted to suggest, but before I hand back the floor to you, Mr. Chair, allow me to suggest that the theme of this conversation is very central, very actual. We are talking about rethinking agriculture for the continent, which to me, we should be looking at walking the talk more than rethinking, because Dr. Abebe said that we already know what has to be done. And if we do know what has to be done, we should be looking at the rear mirror to look at the lessons that are there to be learned. How do we apply those lessons going forward? How do we make sure that we use the good practices that have been documented across the globe and the continent to take to scale and address the gaps, including our failure to integrate the risk dimension into the National Agricultural Investment Plan? So we should be looking at making sure that we come up with NAIVs, National Agricultural Investment Plan, that are risk-proofed. The Honorable Minister mentioned that the climate smart agriculture is something that we should not be discussing, we should be implementing. This is also my stance on the matter. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Augustine. Really, the message is clear. COVID-19 brings disruption, even though we had lot of issues before with a lot of challenges, but something is today key is how to be really resilient and sustainable, because sustainability is essential for food security. Both points are in the table of our multilateral agencies, in the table of the government, in the table of private sector. Implementation is ongoing. We need to foster the development of this implementation, but also we need to reinforce small farmers to be sure that, as someone said in one of the chat message, farming will not only be a way of life, but it's a way of life, but also it is basically business, and getting more value added, it can be also agro-business. So we have not a lot of time to answer to all those questions, but I'll be sure that in the chat there will be more exchanges. Thank you to you all for your presence and your following of this conference. We have a rendezvous, I will say, for the Africa Agri Forum in November in Yaoundé. Hope that we will be able all to attend to that. And I'll let Sukaina the floor to give you more insight for the next conferences we will hold for Digital Africa Live and with the umbrella of African Union. Thank you to you all, and happy to have this great discussion together.
Thank you, Mr. Abedjob. Thank you for this excellent debate, and thank you all the participants for your time. We invite you for next week's edition of Digital Africa Live. Thank you, Dr. Augustine Wambo Wemju, Dr. Abebe Haley, and Her Excellence Joseph Asak. Thank you, and see you next week.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye.
You, all of you. Thank you so much, Commissioner, for inviting me.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Madam Commissioner. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.